the crisis nobody prepared for. It didn't begin with panic or collapse. There were no sudden failures, no dramatic headlines, no obvious trigger. Instead, the system drifted into danger while everyone was watching the wrong risks. To understand why this crisis caught so many unprepared, we need to examine how anticipation shapes blindness. Financial systems train themselves to expect disruption in familiar forms. Stress scenarios are rehearsed. Safeguards are built. Attention fixes on dangers that have already left scars. What is prepared for feels manageable. What is unfamiliar feels improbable. Over time, preparedness narrows focus. Institutions grow confident in their defenses against known threats. Models reflect historical extremes. Oversight strengthens where past damage occurred. The system becomes excellent at fighting the last war, while leaving other fronts exposed. This environment changes behavior subtly. Warning signs that do not resemble past crises feel harmless. Unusual patterns are explained away as temporary distortions. Metrics remain within tolerance, reinforcing calm. Stability appears intact, even as pressure accumulates in unexpected places. Markets reflect this mindset. Volatility behaves normally. Liquidity seems sufficient. Prices respond to news in predictable ways. Confidence grows not because risk is absent, but because risk looks familiar, and familiar risks feel controlled. Regulators face the same constraint. Frameworks evolve incrementally, addressing gaps revealed by history. Oversight becomes precise, but narrow. Emerging threats that do not fit established categories remain difficult to justify action against. Preparation becomes selective. The crisis forms quietly within this comfort. It grows through interactions rather than events, through behavior rather than balance sheets, through alignment rather than excess. By the time disruption becomes visible, it does not resemble anything the system has practiced responding to. This is the most dangerous kind of crisis, one that develops without violating expectations, one that advances while indicators remain calm, one that is not prepared for, because it does not look like a crisis at all. And when recognition finally arrives, the system discovers that readiness of the familiar offers little protection against the unknown. As the system moved deeper into unfamiliar territory, the signals it relied on continued to reassure. Capital ratios looked healthy. Stress tests passed. Market indicators behaved within expected ranges. Nothing demanded urgent response, and so none came. The absence of alarm became its own confirmation. Institutions adapted rationally to what they could see. Risk was hedged where models indicated vulnerability. Exposure was reduced in areas flagged by regulators. Resources flowed toward managing measurable threats. Meanwhile, pressures that did not register clearly were left unattended, not out of negligence, but because they did not fit established frameworks. Behavior across the system slowly aligned. Firms responded to the same data, the same incentives, the same assumptions about where danger lived. Strategies converged. Portfolios grew more similar. What felt like diversification at the individual level became concentration at the system level. Markets reflected this convergence. Assets moved together more often. Liquidity pooled in familiar instruments. When minor disturbances occurred, reactions were swift but shallow. Each recovery reinforced confidence that the system could absorb disruption without consequence. Regulators observed growing complexity, but saw no clear breach. Oversight remained reactive by design. Acting without evidence risked credibility. Waiting felt justified. The system appeared stable enough to warrant patience. Public awareness remained low. Daily financial life continued uninterrupted. Credit flowed. Payments cleared. Savings grew. The crisis was not visible because it was not dramatic. It was embedded in structure, behavior, and expectation. This was the deeper progression. A system preparing intensely for specific failures while drifting toward a different kind of fragility. The danger was not excess risk. It was synchronized behavior guided by incomplete signals. By the time pressure began surfacing more persistently, it was no longer isolated. It was everywhere at once, woven into the fabric of how decisions were made. The crisis had not arrived suddenly. It had been assembling quietly, protected by the very preparedness designed to stop it. The conflict finally surfaced when the system encountered stress it could not localize. Not a single shock, but a pattern. Small disruptions began appearing across multiple markets at once. Liquidity tightened unevenly. Pricing behaved inconsistently. Interventions worked in one area, only to expose strain in another. Institutions struggled to identify the source because there was no single source. Risk was not concentrated in one asset or sector. It was embedded in behavior. Models flagged issues, but without a common explanation. The data no longer told a clear story. What once felt like noise began forming a signal that did not match any known scenario. As uncertainty grew, behavior shifted. Firms reduced exposure cautiously, but in similar ways, investors sought safety in the same instruments. Funding conditions tightened simultaneously across institutions that believed themselves diversified. The system reacted collectively, amplifying stress through alignment rather than panic. Markets reflected this tension with erratic movement. Volatility rose without clear catalysts. Correlations increased where independence was assumed. Liquidity appeared and vanished unpredictably. Participants hesitated, unsure whether to treat events as temporary disturbances or signs of something structural. Regulators faced an uncomfortable reality. The tools designed to address isolated failures were less effective against distributed pressure. There was no institution to rescue, no market to close, no rule to enforce. Intervention risked appearing arbitrary. Inaction risked allowing confusion to deepen. Public confidence began to erode quietly. There were no dramatic collapses, but trust weakened. The system felt unstable without being visibly broken. People sensed that something was wrong, even if no one could clearly explain what it was. This was a defining moment. The crisis revealed itself not through collapse, but through ambiguity. The system was under stress, yet could not name the threat. Preparedness for familiar dangers offered no guidance. Confidence faltered because understanding did. The conflict was no longer about absorbing shock. It was about interpreting reality without a script. And in that uncertainty, the limits of preparation became impossible to ignore. Because the crisis nobody prepared for does not announce itself with failure. It announces itself with confusion. The reckoning arrived without a single defining moment. There was no dramatic collapse to mark the end. Only a gradual recognition that the system had been strained in ways no one had anticipated. Stability returned, but it felt different, less confident, more cautious, and far more aware of its limits. In the aftermath, attention shifted from what failed to what had been missed. Policymakers reviewed not just tools and rules, but assumptions. Oversight expanded beyond institutions and assets into patterns of behavior that had quietly aligned across the system. Preparedness was redefined to include curiosity about what did not fit existing models. Institutions adapted by broadening their view of risk. Scenario planning moved beyond historical extremes. Diversity of strategy regained importance. The goal was no longer to be perfectly prepared for known threats, but to remain flexible when unfamiliar ones emerged. Resilience became less about strength and more about adaptability. Markets absorbed the lesson unevenly. Some confidence returned. Some habits changed. Volatility was no longer dismissed as noise, but examined for what it might signal. Stability came to mean the ability to function under uncertainty, not the absence of disruption. For the public, trust rebuilt slowly, not because the system promised it would never fail, but because it acknowledged that not all dangers can be predicted. Transparency replaced reassurance. Understanding replaced illusion. Looking back, the crisis nobody prepared for exposed a fundamental truth. The greatest vulnerabilities form where attention is lowest and confidence is highest. Preparation can blind as easily as it can protect, especially when it narrows imagination. The enduring lesson is simple, but difficult to accept. Safety does not come from expecting the right crisis. It comes from building systems capable of facing the wrong one. So what do you think? Are we repeating the same mistake again? The